This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. Kane Pittman and Olgun with our first official podcast in the lead up to the Olympics. Only a few days away for the Boomers, the Opals, the 3x3 team. And this is the place where you want to get your news and hopefully have a little bit of a laugh, Olgs. But the excitement is building. The anticipation is building. Maybe the confidence building as well when it comes to the Boomers.
The confidence absolutely has to be building. I think I speak for everyone who is either a fan of this Australian Boomers team or adjacent to it or whatever, that I am more hopeful for this team this week than I was a week and a half ago. Purely based on the not purely based on the results, but also all the indicators and things like that. Everything looks pretty good. But firstly, Kane, tell me where you are coming at us live from.
Yes, well, if you're watching on YouTube, you might think I'm at a beautiful beach resort with this, looks like an island painting behind me here. But no, I have made it to Lille in France. I arrived in Paris yesterday morning. So you're normally the one that's getting all the praise for the early morning podcast. It's about 5:15 local time here in France. It's quarter past 9 a.m. local time in France, 5:15 in Australia. In the US, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning. So I don't really know what time it is, but I have seen a bunch of Australian people rolling into town over the last 24 hours since I've been here. And given the fact that I know that they've come all the way from Australia, I have nothing to complain about. So we're in good spirits here. And I even caught up with the boss, Mickey Mouse, yesterday. So what could go wrong? That was the most important interview I'm going to have over this next 2 weeks.
It was the wildest thing that I didn't even put two and two together, that when I opened Instagram and saw your Instagram story, at Kane Pittman, go follow him. The first thing he did was he went to Disneyland, and it didn't even click in my brain that Mickey Mouse is, of course, our CEO and overlord. But the fact that you were interviewing Mickey, and for those people who aren't sort of us sort of media likes, the idea of doing a monologue just straight to a camera is one of the things I hate most about doing media, when you have no stimulus to work off, you have no other person to work off. Mickey Mouse was just miming next to you, which he has every right to do as our boss. He can do what he likes, but that's really, really impressive. So kudos to you for doing that.
No, thank you. Yes, he was very enthusiastic, and added pressure when you've got, I'm going to estimate, 150 kids screaming for Mickey's attention right in front of me because they wanted photos, and they're thinking, who is this idiots up there with the ESPN mic doing an interview?
You stole Mickey from the children.
Yeah, well, hey, it was an organized interview. I can't say anything else other than that. Now, on to the basketball, because that's what people want to hear about. I am going to be following the teams, the Boomers, the Opals, hopefully from here in Lille all the way to France, as they both try and contend for a medal.
Over to Paris. It's not that early, Kane. Over to France. Come on, man. Lille to Paris.
Look, we're working our way through it. But the point is, I'm already in France. The point is that I would say confidence is building, but there is going to be a spanner in the works, and it's probably going to happen for both teams. We understand that. For the Boomers, it comes in the form of Dante Exum, who has become such an important player for this team. And first, we thought maybe there was some head or neck issues. He crashed into Duop Reith's knee in one of the warm-up games. Gets all clear. They were very cautious about what they were doing there. Then the next game he comes out and he has the compound dislocation of his finger. And Olgun, this is not an injury out of all of them that I want to suffer in my time on this earth.
No, so compound dislocation means it sort of severed the skin. So I assume that whomever dealt with that would have seen some bone, which is wild. It was a point where in the immediate aftermath, they thought it was quite serious, to the point where they had to make the considerations on, will we have to replace this guy? Will he be available for any of this tournament? Once the scans came back, they showed no fracture. I'm still under the impression that he's doubtful for that first game against Spain. My feel is that he will not be playing in that game against Spain. So that's obviously a big loss for the Boomers. He is not only a useful wing option for them, but he's also their backup point guard. Gorge said over and over again that we want to play the shit out of Dante. And this obviously makes that very, very difficult. In his place, I imagine Matthew Dellavedova gets a pretty decent run. I think his minutes have actually been quite solid. Granted, they've been spot minutes. Maybe a bit more Joe Ingles. I know they like the creation out of him. But no Dante. For the Boomers' sake, hopefully only for that one game. And I think they are cautiously optimistic that it will only be that one game.
Yeah, I think the playmaking element of this, and we'll see, and hopefully if it's only one game, maybe it doesn't matter as much, but it still asks questions for Gorge and this team after they had a really strong preparation leading in. So I think your point about the playmaking element of this is probably the most important one because, again, naturally, and we said this, we were going to see questions about Matisse Thybulle. And, okay, well, you lose a defender with size. Wouldn't it be nice to have Matisse Thybulle there? But he has been the primary playmaker off the bench. We know they're going with Giddey and Mills, which I still love. We'll get into that. But it does ask questions of the rotation, and do one of those guys come off the floor even a little bit earlier and they try and split those minutes? I don't know whether that's the best. There'll be people that will say that's a situation that could work. But yeah, Daly, Joe Ingles, and then probably the other guy that could stand to see a few more minutes is Josh Green. Now, probably not in the playmaking role, but if you need size and defensive capabilities and really perhaps a replacement starter if they decide in a game that they don't want to go with the too big Nick Kay, Jock Landale situation, I would have thought Dante Exum probably was in line to potentially move in as a guy that can do a little bit of everything. Maybe now that guy is Josh Green, but I think clearly it looks like those three are the guys that are going to benefit, if that's the right word, from perhaps a increased role.
Yeah, so with Dante, and again, for the Boomers' sake, hopefully it's only the one game, but you're probably replacing somewhere between like 18 to 30 minutes. This coaching staff, I think, will coach based on feel, based on matchups, based on what they're seeing out there. So sometimes Dante will play, 16 to 20 minutes. Sometimes he'll play 25 to 30, just based on the matchups and things like that. You have to replace a lot of minutes. So let's say it's an average of 20-ish minutes. That's a lot of minutes to replace, and it's also a lot of responsibility to replace. I think we would have heard it a lot in the lead up, but Dante coming off the bench and being a dynamic creator is something that this team could absolutely use, especially when sometimes things stick. Sometimes it's difficult for guys outside of Josh Giddey to get 2 feet in the paint. Dante Exum is absolutely that guy. I agree with you that Josh Green, who I think should have an uptick in minutes anyway, should get an uptick in minutes here. But I honestly think it's going to be a lot of Matthew Dellavedova. We saw some minutes with Deli, Patty, and Giddy on the floor at the same time against France. It wouldn't surprise me if that's a direction that they go in and give Deli some more responsibility, because that's someone who they absolutely trust to give responsibility to.
Yeah, trust is a big part of that. I'm also a little bit curious with Deli. Yeah, we've seen him as that impact player that can come in for that 5-10 minute burst and change the momentum. If another team is playing fast, he's going to pressure full court. He's going to play like a maniac. I already mentioned the Andrew Bogut. He comes on the floor like he's just thrown down 7 Red Bulls. Like, the energy is through the roof. And I do wonder, if you stretch that to 10 minutes, stretch that to 15 minutes, is the impact the same as it would be for those 5-10 minutes? So I wonder whether they want to extend that. And here's the other part of this, particularly when you look at someone like Josh Green. When he was traded, we discussed the idea, what does he look like in what we think potentially could be an expanded role in the NBA? We said the same thing for Dyson Daniels. What does it look like in Atlanta? We think that he's going to have more opportunities there than he would have in New Orleans, just based on the talent. So then you say, okay, we've seen Dyson Daniels, and it's fair enough to say that there should have been a question mark. Is he ready to move into a starting role? Is he ready to be a primary guy? He's been bloody awesome. So now you say, is there that type of scope? It doesn't have to be to that level as good as Dyson's been, but is there more room for Josh Green? Because I do think there is an element of, what you're going to get from Daly, what you're going to get from Joe Ingles, and that's great. But is there any more untapped upside in this team from expanding a role? And is Josh Green capable of that? I don't really know, but I think that that's a more exciting question to ask as we lead into here. And also, let's be honest, hopefully it's not a question that needs to be answered long-term in this tournament, but it's at least something there lurking around the surface, because really we look at the young guys and we say, okay, this is where the growth is going to come. What type of run can you have?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like, it's very similar to what Dyson Daniels is exhibiting right now, but almost in the other direction, where Dyson Daniels has really excelled from being a wing. They're not putting the ball in his hands, right? He's not a point guard for this team. He's just playing on the wing, and he's doing a really good job at doing that. I think Josh Green could maybe excel going the other direction, maybe not playing the entirety of his minutes on the wing, and maybe having the ball in his hands in stretches. I know they sort of trust him with the ball in his hands when the team is running, but we see in the half court, we generally see him like what he was with the Dallas Mavericks, right? Just standing in the corner. And then there is a legitimate question, as a good point, that guys like Matthew Dellavedova and Josh Green, what do they look like when they have to pace themselves? Delhi is the perfect example of that, where I think we saw at the end of the championship series in last NBL season that he maybe ran out of gas. Now, I don't think that will happen on this team because the responsibility on him and is just nowhere near as what it was with United. Totally. But there is a ton of value in having 3-minute spurts from Matthew Dellavedova, who is this absolute pitbull, versus him having to maybe play a 6-minute stretch where he maybe has to pace himself a little bit more. I wonder if his skill set, the actual talent he brings, is lessened because he might have to pace himself. I think he would almost have to change the way he plays.
So that's interesting. We look at the guard/wing rotation, and it's so muddled up because Australia do have a bunch of guys. The Boomers have a bunch of guys that, at least size-wise, positionally, you could say are kind of similar. And it definitely has been a curiosity. We've seen Josh Green start games before, and we wondered, or many people, including me, assumed that he might have been the third guy in that starting lineup. But I do wonder, how much of this is the team saying, well, if you're the starter, you are just going to stand in the corner. Do we think you can do more than that? And how do we maximize that you can do more? Let's keep you away, not at all times, but let's keep you away from Josh Giddey and Patty Mills because they're going to be the primary guys that create. We know that they can keep the offense ticking along. So who's a guy that maybe can benefit, not only be an outstanding defender, but benefit from being the guy that doesn't need to touch the ball as much? And Dyson Daniels has done that. He shot the three really well. He can move off the ball well. We saw the game winner against France where he was able to cut the baseline. A lot of that credit goes to Josh Giddey because he's just unbelievable in those situations. But Dyson doesn't strike you as the type of guy that's going to get frustrated. He's happy to play that role, and he thrives on the defensive end. So I do wonder when they're going through the lineups and they're mixing and matching how much of that was the thinking, because it does make some sense. And if that was the thinking, then maybe Josh Green is in a position to be able to take some added responsibility as maybe the sixth man, the seventh man, one of the first guys off the bench.
So this brings us perfectly into the can Patty Mills and Josh Giddy coexist argument, which the need for having that other ball handler, that other initiator, that other creator, it's helpful when there's Dante Exum there, but that need is diminished because we're largely seeing these guys having their minutes staggered. Now, they'll start the first quarter on the floor together, but then one of them quickly comes out. The same thing happens in the second quarter. They play a few minutes, and then one of them comes out based on basically who's feeling it at the time. But because their minutes are largely staggered, where we'll see Josh Giddy check out at the 5-minute mark, and then we'll see Patty check out at the 2-minute mark for Giddy, right? So they're basically just swapping. It does reduce the need for having that sort of third ball handler, that other key initiator, because you do have Giddy and Patty as those initiators. Now, I am still of the mind that this team is best when Giddy and Patty are separated, when their minutes are staggered. There are times where we can see them coexist and it looks okay, but for the most part, I think that their minutes should be staggered, and I think that's what the coaching staff thinks too.
Yeah, look, we've gone back and forth on this. I think the one thing that is clear we've seen already, and look, if Patty Mills isn't a guy that can score a whole bunch of points, can get you buckets like no one else in this team can get, can hit shots down the stretch, or at least be in a position to space the floor, you're probably not going on a long run, because you can lean on the defense as much as this team will. You can lean on the elite playmaking of Josh Giddy and Jock Landau and everything he's doing. But ultimately, there's going to be games where if you're not hitting all the threes, you need Patty to go and get your 4 or 5 threes. You just need it. And there's no one else that can do it. There's been games where the Boomers have had guys like Giddy, like Daniels. They've hit those outside shots. But Patty Mills is the one guy you can really lean on. And I think that it was really interesting to watch down the stretch in this game against France, because we talk about all the preparation this team has had. But that was perfect preparation. And I didn't even care whether they won or lost. But I was just watching the last 2 minutes to see how those two guys in particular played down the stretch. Now, there was definitely a little bit of taking turns. And, I think ultimately this is a team that if they get in that situation again, they're just going to have to lean on the hot hand. And we did see that a little bit at the World Cup last year where Josh Giddy was the guy and he was able to have the ball in his hands 2 or 3 possessions in a row. But having said that, I actually liked, for the most part, the looks that those guys were getting. If Patty can dribble into a mid-range jump shot and have separation and get an open look, it's an unbelievable look with 2 minutes to go. If Josh Giddy can get to his floater range, he missed one of those, but he got there. And I was like, okay, that's great. The only shot out of the whole final 2.5 minutes that I didn't like was when there wasn't much movement on offense and Giddy kind of just dribbled and shot a 3. And I didn't really like that. I don't think that's ever going to be a great shot for this team unless it's a heat check and he's knocked down 6 buckets in a row. But other than that, the results weren't great. Maybe that's good. You don't want to hit all your clutch shots in a warm-up game, save them for the Olympics. But I thought it worked okay down the stretch. And then ultimately, maybe ironically, it wasn't either of those two guys that got the bucket and Giddy gets the assist to Daniels. So I thought it was great preparation, but I also thought it was a little instructive about where those two guys are at and what it could look like down the stretch.
Yeah, I think it's definitely improved, especially over this warm-up game period. And the fact that they do start together, I don't think it's just symbolic, and I don't think it's just ceremonial. It's not that, we have to start Patty because this and this and this, or we have to start Giddy because X, Y, Z. They are the two players who have earned their starting spot, and they can function on the floor together. I just think that maybe it opens up both of their games in different ways for them to be staggered. The fact that they can play together, and we saw at the end of that France game, we've seen at the end of some of these games, that is a hopeful thing. But I still think this coaching staff will basically just go with, and this goes beyond the Patty Giddy question, they'll go with the 5 that they think is best. It's not this is a designated 5 for this part of the game. We saw that against France, where I had a lot of people hitting me up asking me if Jock Landale was injured, right? He played 9 minutes in that game. And that wasn't a 9 minutes because of an injury. He was not injured. That wasn't a 9 minutes because we have to rest this guy because we need to, cover him in bubble wrap before the Olympics. That was, he played 9 minutes because they liked the minutes out of Will Magnay and they liked the minutes out of Duop Reith. That was a coach's decision, 9 minutes. And I think that's a good thing going into the Olympics where nothing is promised, right? Everything in this situation is earned. And so the people who are crying about Duop Reith's non-minutes, that's what was needed at the time. And I think the coaching staff was correct in making that decision. Playing Duop Reith against France, I think that was needed at the time. Having that stretch big out there against France's bigs who want to stay in the paint. I think they're coaching based on feel and based on the matchup in front of them and based on who's rolling. And I think that's ultimately the best message to send going into the first game of the Olympics.
So the last one I would say on the Patty Giddy stuff is, why, one of the reasons, it's only a little thing, one of the reasons why, I look at it and I say, well, this can work and this can help other guys. And a lot of it is contingent on Patty. But if you just watch the offense and watch the way Patty is defended when he's off the ball, standing in the corner, and then take Patty off the floor and put really any other player in that position on the corner and look how
the gravity is real. The gravity is real.
They just don't have guys that defenses are going to worry about. And the longer the Olympics go, that's going to become more problematic because they're going to say, all right, well, we're happy for that guy to shoot the ball in the corner. We don't really care about that. What we don't want is Giddy getting downhill. What we don't want is one-on-one pick and roll with Jock Landale. So, I think that stuff matters. When you say that they're happy to use different lineups, it is curious that you bring up Duop Reith because I've sort of been thinking about it, and we debated the squad and why wasn't this guy there, or could they have picked this guy? And then we got 3 warm-up games in, and I saw people were angry about Duop Reith not getting minutes as well, and I kind of just realized that it doesn't really matter. There's always going to be someone that you can get angry about, whether they're on the squad, whether they're not playing. But the 3 big situation is so interesting because Landale, Reith, Magnay, yes, 3 big guys. You don't have any 7'3" guys out there, though. They're pretty versatile. And I do wonder, when you do play a Greece, if you play, and then Canada's a little bit smaller, I wonder whether the actual starting 5, we're going to see that change. I know I've spoken about that a little bit, but it's great to see that they're willing to change in between games based on matchups. But I'm curious, not getting ahead of ourselves, but particularly that Canada game where you have got Jamal Murray, you've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you've got so many guys that are so explosive, the team's so small. Is that a game where you do throw a Josh Green into the starting lineup? Is that a game where maybe Patty does come off the bench? I doubt that, but I am curious to see how that plays out because they have shown flexibility within games based on what they're seeing.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if it'll be the starting lineup. I guess there is some value in having a consistent starting group out there just for continuity and to get things rolling. But I agree with you, against Canada especially, the idea of having Giddy and Patty out there on the floor at the same time, going up against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray and Dylan Brooks and RJ Barrett. There are 4 NBA wings practically out on the floor, and I don't think that is a lineup for the Boomers that is conducive to success on the defensive end. The cool thing about the 3 bigs is that it doesn't, at least at this point from what we've seen so far, it doesn't feel like one of them is an insurance big. It feels like these are just 3 different types of bigs that we have that we would like to use. That's the way the coaching staff is feeling about it. And I think that's the case with the rest of the roster too. I think from 1 to 12, everyone has the capacity and the potential to see minutes in this tournament purely because they bring a different skill set. We already spoke about Matthew Dellavedova. We've seen those glimpses of what Joe Ingles does. From a creation standpoint, you can tell every time the offense gets a little bit stagnant, Joe Ingles gets on the floor and he will create one dunk or layup just from coming off an on ball and making a little pocket pass or something like that. I do want to say something on the general outrage that we've seen. First on Matisse Thybulle not making the team, in parts on Chris Golding or Xavier Cooks not making the team, and then not playing Duop Reith. I think everyone out there has to stop falling in love with the idea of these guys, and instead you should form your opinions based on the outcomes we're seeing. Right, the outcomes of these warm-up games have been largely good, not just from the results but from the indicators. And so once these warm-up games were finished, the new response should be, oh, what a good team that's been chosen. I like the balance of this team. The identity seems clear. That's what it should be, not, oh, good on you, but also where are the Duop Reith minutes? Good on you, but also this, and this, right? Good on you. Where is Matisse? It should get to a point where instead of falling in love with the player or the idea, you should fall in love with the outcome, right? Because that's ultimately, if that's what you actually want to achieve, then that's what you should base your opinions on, not just the initial idea of something that is turning out to maybe not be wrong, but this other way is also something that works. That's something that you should be happy with, right?
Yeah, I think this Olympic tournament, again, you go through it, and we mentioned they had a warm-up game against Puerto Rico where it looked like Australia should probably win that matchup 9 times out of 10. Maybe there's 1 or 2 other teams there, but we've seen South Sudan were awesome against Team USA. That was such an entertaining game of basketball.
Yeah.
We see Germany push Team USA as well. And in the first game for the Boomers, they've got Spain, a team who, I think maybe there might be a way to look into this matchup and say, okay, well, maybe this is the easiest matchup. I don't necessarily agree with that in this group. I think Spain is an absolute threat. So I think, overall, to your point, I don't know whether the Boomers can win unless they win a medal, because there is always going to be, well, you failed. But then I kind of look at this and I say, if they win a medal, it's going to be one of the most remarkable runs, or the most remarkable run we've seen from an Australian men's basketball team to even get to that point based on the competition they've got, starting with Spain in a few days.
Yeah, I think everyone is in agreement that if you win a medal in this tournament, if you win the gold medal in this Olympic basketball tournament, that is the most impressive Olympic basketball tournament medal on the men's side that anyone could ever have, right? The final 8 that comes out of these group stages, that will be, and I think Windhorse has been saying this ad nauseum throughout the entire campaign, that it will be the best collection of international basketball teams that we've ever seen on the men's side, right? It is going to be, and for the Boomers' sake, the fact that they have to get through Spain and Canada and Greece just to get to that point, and then whomever they would play then is going to be one of those top 2 teams probably of the other side, right? It's going to be a France or Serbia or Team USA or one of those groups, one of those teams, and then it's going to be another one of those teams. Again, it's going to be unbelievably difficult, right? And so the expectations should be just that, right? It's a tough competition to get through, but if you're able to get through it, you get all the kudos in the world.
Saturday night, 7 p.m., as we said, beautiful time slots at home in Australia.
Oh, perfect for me. I'm in Melbourne, Australian Eastern Standard Time, beautiful. 7 p.m., 9:30, awesome times.
Sensational. I've said this. I think it's going to be a little bit strange for the players. 11 a.m. local time. Tip-off, probably getting to the arena at 8:30, 8:45.
No shoot
breakfast
around,
just
really.
settling. You've just had your first coffee. I don't feel ready to play a basketball game right now. I've messed up a few words. Podcasting questionable today, but we're warming into it. But that's what the guys are going to deal with in a few days' time here. So let's talk about Spain a little bit then. We'll be able to podcast throughout, so we'll leave the rest of the group and leave the Opals just for now because still quite a few days before those games. So Spain, as I said, must win. Obviously, you say it's a tournament like this, but I'll tell you what it is. It's a must not get blown out loss, because if you lose by a margin, you can pretty much kiss it all goodnight right from the start. So with 3 groups of 4, we know the top 2 obviously going through. That's 6 teams. 2 teams left out, which means that there's only actually going to be one third place team that isn't there. It's a bizarre setup to have 8 teams out of the 12. I think there's a significant case to say it should be a 16-team tournament, and then you have the quarterfinals from there. We'll see what that looks like, but for this game, that's really the equation. Yes, get the win. You're in a great position, but you can't get blown out because that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, and the being blown out is something that should be in a team's control, right? If you're going to lose the game, I get it. These games are tough, but you have to be able to have the requisite amount of motor and urgency to not get blown out. This shouldn't be a situation where the Boomers have to rely on other results in other groups in order to get through. If that's the case, then it's going to be really, really tough. Yes, in some of those other groups, there will be a third place team that blows out a fourth place team, but for the Boomers' sake, the hope is that third place team gets blown out.
Team USA, steamroll everyone. Do us all a favor. Get your hopes really up, so then you drop your guard when you get to the quarterfinals.
Totally. So, for example, in that group, it's Team USA, Serbia, South Sudan, Puerto Rico. The hope is that Team USA blows all of those teams out, and that Serbia blows all of those teams out. So the third place team, they might get percentage by beating the fourth place team, but they'll lose a lot of percentage by beating the top 2 teams. That's the hope for the other teams. For Australia, it's a similar thing where, again, if you're not going to win these games, you absolutely cannot get blown out in these games. The Spain one is sneaky because the Boomers they internally they know that this is a really, really it's one of those games that you can't rest on your laurels in this one. You can't just assume because Sergio Llull is very old and Rudy Fernandez is very old and because Willie Hernan Gomez is this slow-footed big man and you can't like rest your hat. You can't lay your hat on those things. I've got all those metaphors mixed up. This is going to be a tough team to play, right? They play a very organic style of basketball. They all play in a similar system throughout their domestic competitions, their domestic teams. So they come into this knowing how to do it. They're battle tested because they just went through an Olympic qualifying tournament. Yes, some of their warm-up games haven't been great. They beat Argentina by a whisker, but that was a game they didn't have Lorenzo Brown in that game. They didn't have Rudy Fernandez in that game. So this is a team that has lots of pieces. They do go 10, 11 deep. And all it takes is for Santi Aldama to pop off, or Lorenzo Brown to hit a couple shots, or for Willie Hernan Gomez to find his footing in the paint. And it could be difficult for this Boomers team. I think the Boomers have to use their pace, use their athleticism to stifle them defensively and get out and run and try to basically get on the front foot from the very beginning.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. You mentioned Santi Aldama. So we got off over 5 3-point attempts per game in the OQTs. We know that he will be one of those guys that you look at him in the NBA and you say, yes, he's a role player, plays for his country. He's going to step up. He got around 17, 18 points per game in that tournament as well. I think it's going to be fascinating because we've seen the Boomers, for the most part, young, athletic. They're going to run. They've got athletes. They're going to try and score. They're going to play above the rim at times. It's a really exciting brand of basketball. And those turnovers, if they can get them in the half court, if they can get those live ball turnovers, they're going to find lots of opportunities to score. I think that's going to be really important for this team as a blueprint right throughout. But maybe particularly against a team that is going to play a lot of half court basketball, he's going to ask questions of the defense. And you're going to need to stop them in those scenarios. They shoot a whole bunch of threes right across the board, not just Aldama. And that's where, it's going to be fascinating with that math game. We just keep on talking about it. But if Australia is sitting around that 22, 23 3-point attempts per game and Spain's getting up 31, 32, that's a big difference, particularly even if both teams are just shooting the average. That is a very difficult margin to overcome. So I think that's the fascination for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned what a lot of what Spain does is very resigned to the half court, right? They're not a team that really wants to get out and run. That's not how they're built. I think something the Boomers did really well against Serbia especially, was really hound the guards coming up the floor, right? So in that case, it was up against Vasily Micic and some of those other guards. I thought they did it really well against France, who we know are coming in with high-level bigs, but their guard play is a little bit underwhelming. And so you saw Dyson Daniels and Matthew Dellavedova and Josh Green really get into the guards, made sure that the ball got over the line at the 16-17 mark, and then this team really only has 14, 15 seconds to get into their stuff. Nothing can really hit the second side. So I think the key to stopping their bigs is really stifling the guards on the way up the floor. Make it really difficult for this team to get into their actions. we've seen the Boomers do it against teams that have lackluster guard play and lackluster backcourts. I think Spain, while I think Lorenzo Brown is a high-level FIBA guy, and I think Sergio Yul will take up some of that responsibility too, I think that's the key to stopping the dominance that you may see from a Willy Hernan-Gomez or a Santi Aldama.
Yeah, and rebounding, because again, like you talk about the 3-point attempt differential and those long rebounds off 3-point shots, they're such backbreakers and they've got a lot of size. And, this is a game that I expect the Boomers will stay the same. I think they're going to start Landau and Kay. I don't think that's a question.
I agree.
But then whoever is at the 3, Dyson Daniels probably, then Patty Mills is actually decent at flying in and grabbing those rebounds, but they're going to need everyone to support because I think the second possessions are going to be backbreaking, particularly with those guys you spoke about. They'll get established in the paint, and really the paint points has been such a strong way for this Boomers team to try and negate that math equation. So I think as much as I talk about concern about the 3-point attempts, you don't want to shoot them just for the sake of shooting them. And Australia doesn't necessarily have a lot of shooters. So they're getting those transition looks where they'll get the 2-on-1 situations. They'll get a wide open corner 3. That's a great shot. Like, don't be afraid to shoot those. But when the Boomers get into their half-court sets, don't force it. Because we've spoke about shot selection a little bit. There's going to be a lot of pressure, particularly early in this game. So I think you'll be able to tell pretty early with this Boomers team if their offense is functioning, which we've seen it so far. If they look comfortable, then I think at home you can settle into this game and say, okay, even if the shots aren't falling early, it looks like this team is settled in.
The other thing that I think has been an Achilles heel for this Boomers team over this warm-up period, even though this warm-up period has been quite good, is turnovers. And a lot of that has come from Josh Giddy, and against Serbia especially, a lot of live ball turnovers that turned into breakouts on the other end. The hope is that is just him getting a feel for playing in the FIBA game again and playing in a more condensed floor and with new teammates and things like that, and he's just trying new stuff. And that when the real games come, it'll be a little bit more refined. It's a unique one because you don't want to take away his creativity because that is where he excels. But also, he does have to take care of the ball because especially against Spain, they're a team that's going to want to slow it down. Controlling the pace of this game is going to be really key for either team when it comes to either team wanting that ideal outcome for themselves. And so if Spain wants to play this low-paced game, this low-possession game, you can't be turning the ball over in a game that may only have I don't know how many possessions on either end. 60 possessions on either end, ideally for Spain. So I think not turning the ball over, it's Giddy, it's Patty, it's all of the initiators on this team. I think they've got to really take care of the ball, really cherish those half-court possessions, because you don't want to get in that pace game with Spain where they really slow it down and do their thing in the half-court and they don't let you run. That could be a recipe for disaster for the Boomers.
Yeah, and you can't or you don't want to give away any free points, which is,
yes,
as you point to, this is a game where Australia should lead the fast break points. If they can take care of the ball, that should be a strong suit for this team. If you lose that battle, it probably doesn't bode well for the rest of the game. Look, any final thoughts here on this Boomers Spain game, or the Boomers in general, as we wrap this up? Because, as I said, the warm-up games, lots of optimism, very fun. But now the pressure ramps up, and I think our takeaways after this game will be very interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I got one on each side of this. The first one is, I'll say a negative. Where does this team turn to when Patty Mills isn't shooting the ball well? That's a question I've got. I'd love to see if Dyson Daniels has consistently hovered around that 8 to 12 point mark. He's got to keep doing that. But when Patty isn't shooting the ball well or scoring the ball well, Giddy has taken a lot of those scoring reins. But where else is it coming from? Especially with no Dante Exum. Where is the shooting? Right? Where is the scoring? That's something I'm intrigued to see. On the other end, something that I think is hopeful for this Boomers team is that they've really made their identity on the defensive end. That's clearly been what the process has been leading to. That's the priority for this coaching staff. Defense has been number 1, 2, and 3 on the priority list. I think that's a really important thing going into a tournament like this. I think it's a really healthy and sustainable thing. If they can win games purely based on their defense, then maybe that shooting doesn't matter just as much. Maybe that scoring punch that they could have had with Chris Goulding doesn't matter just as much. The fact that that's where their calling card is, that makes me somewhat hopeful for this Australian Boomers team.
There's variance in shooting, Olgun. but there shouldn't be variance in defensive efforts. How's that?
Exactly.
What do you think about
that's
that?
the thing I just said. That took me 1 minute. You just said in 4 seconds, and that's why you're in Lille, my friend.
Very efficient work. Of course, the opening ceremony coming up. So let me think through that. That's Friday night here, so it'll be very, very early Saturday morning, I believe. Now, this is the only downside because we are in Lille and we're moving to France, Paris, France, in a couple of weeks. I'm a little bit more awake. I had that second coffee. The players aren't going. The players aren't going to be there. The Boomers and Opals aren't going to be at the opening ceremony. Just challenges getting back. Obviously, an 11 a.m. tip-off the next morning for the Boomers, so they weren't going, but the Opals are trying to get acclimatized. If you go to the open ceremony, you probably don't get back to Lille till 3 a.m., but they're going to have a gathering together. A bunch of the families are already over here and arriving a little bit later today. So that's a little bit disappointing, but I'm sure nonetheless, if they pick up a win on Saturday morning and Monday night, respectively, they'll be in fine spirits.
And let me say this: it's a little anecdote here. The Team USA is not staying in Lille. Team USA is staying back in Paris, right? So they're jumping on a train after every game and heading back to Paris. The Boomers are staying in Lille. They're in the Olympic Village in Lille. So that is, the Boomers are approaching this with the necessary humility and saying that we are where we need to be, and Team USA is already preparing for those quarterfinals matchups that are going to be over in Paris. And so make of it what you will, but this Boomers team, they're approaching this like the underdogs, and they're going to play like it too. So let's see if that translates to positive outcomes for them.
Very interesting decision, and more than anything, I feel for our great friends Brian Windhorst and Mark Spears, who have also had to stay in Paris and make many trips to Lille, back to Paris, and I'm sure that'll get tiring over the next few weeks. But they're professionals, Olgs. And by the way, I should say, for everyone, obviously go to espn.com.au, follow through the socials. There's going to be so much content right throughout the Olympics, but jump on the YouTube page. You can go back. I'm sure you got a bit of spare time. Olgs did a great podcast with Windy last week, so that's still there on the YouTube page. So, if you don't like just the audio platform, you've got some time at home, jump on YouTube and check out these podcasts as well that we've put up there. But it was an outstanding job by you, and let's see what the next few days brings, Olgs. I look forward to catching up with you, hopefully after a W for the Boomers Saturday evening or whenever we make it happen.
If you don't start the next pod with a bonjour, je m'appelle Kane Pitmont, I'm going to be very, very upset.
I tried some very questionable French in the last 24 hours, and I might have to put it away. It's a little too embarrassing. But we've got 3 weeks, and we'll see how we progress over the time. Outstanding work from you. Like I said, espn.com.au. It's your home for hoops. You know that. We'll be with you right throughout the Olympics. We appreciate you joining us so far. We'll speak to you in a few days. Enjoy the first game for the Boomers against Spain, 7 p.m. Saturday night.